Hello, welcome to, or welcome back to, the fourth episode of my Berlin Marathon training series. In this series, I will be documenting my journey as I prepare for the 2022 Berlin Marathon, which will be my third Berlin Marathon, and the target simply is to better my PB of 2:56. In this episode, I'm at the running room and I'm going to use their specialist equipment to compare the Adios Pro 3s against the Adios Pro 2s.
Hi, my name is Adrian. I'm a running physiotherapist based in Southwest London in Battersea. What we're doing today is we're doing a 3D running assessment using our instrumented treadmill and our high-speed camera. So the instrumented treadmill has a pressure plate that's built underneath the belt of the treadmill. So there's 12,000 pressure sensors that are highly calibrated at a research grade. And then we have two high-speed cameras that can capture your motion side on and rear on, so we can have a look at joint angles. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be comparing the Adios 2s and the Adios 3s. On the left-hand side is the pressure plate with the pressure sensors underneath. Yeah. So you can see exactly your foot as it hits the ground, as it toes off. And as we analyze the data, then you can sort of see what that looks like as we break it down frame by frame. So we're going to start off with Marcus running in the 2s for about 5 to 6 minutes at marathon pace. Once he's settled, we're going to take a capture of a sample size to get a data recording, and then we're going to do the exact same thing in the 3s, and then we're going to compare the two shoes and see which one Marcus looked better in but also felt better in as well.
The Adios Pro 3s, I've had them for over 3 months, and in that time I've worn them for marathon pace efforts, I've worn them for half marathon and 2 10Ks. Just to give you a recap, episode 1 I was in Berlin and I give 5 tips that you need to know if you're running the Berlin Marathon that will help you, whether you're running the first time or you want to run your fastest Berlin Marathon. In episode 2, I cover nutritional tips with registered dietitian Laura Tilt, and I also talk about my training as I do a marathon pace effort at the Big Half Marathon. In episode 3, I attend the London Human Performance Clinic at the University of East London. Andy and Richard conduct a lactate threshold test to help me establish what my training zones are or what my marathon pace effort should be. I will be comparing the Adios Pro 3s to the Adios Pro 2s. In the past, I've done reviews just based on how I feel, and how you feel about a shoe is so subjective. So the purpose of this review is to bring you something different, some science, some data to back how I feel about the shoes, so you can see the full picture as opposed to a subjective opinion.
Feel harder running marathon pace in the treadmill?
Yeah, this feels really surreal because you're stationary, doesn't it? You feel like you're doing things.
And you have that consistency in being propelled, right? When you're running normally, there's going to be that variation where you might go above and below your pace, but then it averages out across a mile or a kilometre. So it's always a different experience.
It is. It feels easier to run on the road. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's typically the general consensus. It's also what you're used to. If you run on treadmills your whole life, you'll feel hard to run on the road.
Yeah, true.
How do you feel?
I feel okay. It's really strange running on the treadmill compared to running on the road. I think maybe it's a stationary position. Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to try the 3s out after the 2s just to make sure I gave it a fair chance. They both felt really comfortable, so we'll speak to Adrian and we'll see what the results tell us.
Definitely a bit more aggressive, isn't it? The 3.
Do you think?
I think so. Just as you roll into your mid stance.
Yeah.
In your mid stance here, typically what you'll see in your mid stance is that your foot will be relatively quite flat. So your heel on here is more or less on. Obviously, it's got a bit of a rocker bottom, but you sort of come onto your toes, but you're not too bad. But over here, you'll sort of rock onto your toes in the mid stance a lot quicker.
Yeah. Also
generates a slightly sharper knee angle. And then maybe sort of gets you a bit more upright as well with your trunk lean. You're actually better on the contact on your 2s versus your 3s. In your 3s, you sort of end up sort of like almost pushing out. You can see you have a higher hip flexion angle. Even though your knee angle and where you hit the ground is relatively nice and straight, and that's pretty comparable on either side, you just have a tendency to sort of just go forwards a bit. So I'm looking at where you're making contact in relation to your center of mass, or roughly your body, which is, if you look at the front of your chest. So you can see here, front of the chest versus the foot is pretty close to each other, whereas front of the chest here to the foot is a little bit further out. So you tend to just probably overstride a bit more in that shoe.
So it's almost like you land better in the 2s, but then you kind of roll through the motion better in the 3s.
Yeah, so you land better on the 2, but then you sort of almost like roll through on the 3 a little bit quicker. And it's tough to say whether that's the shoe or because of the shoe you sort of land a bit further in front, but you feel this need to sort of like bring your foot through faster because you're trying to turn over at a pretty fast peg as well, like at 14.9 on marathon pace. And then you can see at extension, actually like you in the 2s, and extension is better as well. You're getting more hip extension, a lot more hip extension. If you look at it in a percentage, you're almost getting about 40-50% more hip extension, which is then promoting you to get a better angle as you roll through as well. So better hip extension, better activation of your glutes, your hamstrings, versus here you're only getting 10 degrees hip extension. So maybe that's why your foot's then having to reach forwards more. Whereas, because you're getting more hip extension here, you're getting a nice whip, and then you come through.
Okay.
So
basically, the 2s are ahead by like a point.
Yeah, I'd say like if you had to give it like if you had to look at it, if you had to give it a 3-point system, I would say on contact, the 2s win there, so that's 1 point for the 2s.
Yeah.
If you look at the toe-off perspective, getting more hip extension, the 2s have a win there, so that's 2 points for the 2.
Yeah.
At mid, it's probably not too dissimilar. Like you could sort of argue either way, so we can call that a draw. So I would say at the moment, the most fairest thing to say is probably 2-0 in favour of the 2s.
The thing is though, this is what I feel like when you're running it, like on the shorter stuff, it feels like more dynamic to run in for the 2s.
Okay.
But I think the 3s feel better to run in over a longer distance.
And
it's a weird, it's the one starts ahead and then I think the other one catches up.
And I think what we would recommend, and I would say what most high-level researchers in the running field recommend, is to pick a shoe that's comfortable.
Yeah.
So making contact on your forefoot, you can see that's the portion that's making contact. There's nothing happening at the heel there.
Yeah.
And then as you roll through, you sort of go outside in, which is a very normal pattern. You can roll into a bit of pronation, and then as you toe away, you start to regather yourself. So you go away from that pronation, you start to generate, and you get your pressure through your big toe. So if we zoom into where your toe off pressure is, you're really getting your big toe to work, and you can see that even if you go back a few frames. So working that, what we call that first ray. The first ray is your big toe into your first metatarsal, which is then a nice continuous chain. So that typically tells us if you can work the big toe, you're getting extension on your big toe as you toe off, which helps you activate your plantar fascia. That's that natural spring under your foot. Yeah. And that's all one continuous sling into your Achilles, your calf. So that would then predicate that you're getting a good utilization of that whole complex.
Cool.
So that's happening quite well. This is the 3s. Sort of making contact on your outside part of your foot as well. And as you roll through in the middle, what does that hip drop look like? Probably a bit better here, quite neutral. You have less hip shift or hip drop on the Adios 3 than you do on the Adios 2.
I think that's what I was sort of telling you before, like with that roll thing I feel sometimes. Yeah. It sort of works your pronation, but I think after a while when you're getting tired and you're getting lazy, then that extra flex from your body, you can feel it, especially through.
And there's also less pronation in the shoe as well. So when you go forwards on a frame, you have less pronation of your foot in the 3 versus the 2. Yeah. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's tough to say because you don't have an issue with your feet, or you don't have a tip post issue, which is typically the primary pronating muscle in your body. Yeah. So I don't want to overread into it, but if for the running enthusiasts out there, or if most people like to hone into pronation, then I would say it's one of those things where you could give a point to the 3 because it pronates less. Right? So you're going to have both reports that will generate. Yeah. Okay, so anything in white is your Adios Pro 2. Anything in grey is your Adios Pro 3. But on your 2s, you end up sort of working quite hard to push off through your forefoot. Yeah. And if anything, really nice, consistent, high peak pressures and forces going through your forefoot. And then you can see here on your sort of heel contact as well, you end up sort of like pretty much, the image is on your heel, but this is referring to contact force, not necessarily the force that goes through your heel per se. So, all in all, you can see absorbing force maybe better on your Adios Pro 3, 5% difference here, whereas there's a bit of an asymmetry here. Yeah. your left side might just be letting you down a little bit, at least on today's run.
Yeah.
On the Adios Pro 2. So if we had to look at this, you could say better on push-off with the 2s, better with contact and absorbing force on the 3s, more symmetrical.
The shorter stuff, I think that the 2s work better. Like you definitely feel off the toe off, for example. But in the 3s, like the weight is evenly spread. So when you're going for a further and longer, it's actually better than
and that's the other thing is like, if we ran a marathon on here and then progressively took a capture every single kilometer, what would that look like? Maybe one day when we've got 3 hours, we can do that. if you're up for running a marathon on this treadmill.
I'm not sure.
And both your stride and your step lengths are consistent across both shoes, so you're not sort of doing the too dissimilar in either shoe.
Okay.
Cadence is also pretty much bang on in either shoe as well. So you're 175 and 176, so pretty much exactly the same. Yeah, but you're talking a 1 step difference with very similar sort of deviations in error as well. So
it's like pretty similar across the board, isn't it?
Yeah. Even when we look at here with step time, that's your contact time.
Yeah.
Contact time is pretty much the same on both shoes as well.
Yeah.
And then finally, this is the nice part to look at. This is your pressure and your force curves. So ideally what you want to see is a nice initial contact pressure which is low, and this nice rise peak in a push-off pressure that is higher.
Yeah.
So the grey line at the back is the 3s. The coloured line in red on either one is the 2s.
Okay.
So you end up having a higher contact pressure on your 2s, and then your peak pressure on pushing off on your 2s is higher as well. But I would say what happens in the 3 on both sides is nicer. Lower contact pressure, you're not sort of hitting the ground too hard.
Yeah.
And that might come down to, I think, the foam on those shoes and the stack on the forefoot's just a little bit nicer than this one here.
Yeah.
All in all, I would say the pressure pattern and what that curve looks like is better on the 3 versus the 2.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of confirmed what I thought when I was feeling I was running in the shoes. Like the 2s feel great, they feel light, they feel, for shorter distances, they feel amazing. But I think after a period of time, you start to feel that roll, and as your form starts going, then for me, it kind of goes a bit south. But if you can maintain that consistency and that pressure, I think the 2s are amazing. That's why a lot of people stick with the 2s. But I think, for the 3s, like if things start to go a little bit south, they're a little bit more forgiving with the foam and things like that.
I mean, the general consensus at the moment is that people are preferring their 2s over their 3s.
Yeah.
And to that, I always ask is like, what's the longest run you've done in your 3s?
Yeah.
Because if you're just doing a short, sharp session in your 3 and you're comparing it to the 2, it goes back to exactly what you said. The 2s will feel better in a shorter distance. But if you haven't taken your 3s out for a 30-kilometer long run with marathon pace efforts in between that, what does it feel like there?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to sort of like put it through different filters and then make that decision. And, it's sort of like, I'd be then curious to know what people's opinions are there, because I think for most part, and I'm assuming, people have been testing out their 3s in track sessions and tempo sessions because they don't want to break it in too much and, put too many miles on the shoe before they're racing.
That's the thing, I think if you do the track session in the 3s, you probably end up feeling worse off than running the 2s, because I think the 2s will be better for that sort of stuff. Whereas if you were doing the marathon pace stuff in the 3s, you think, it feels a bit strange, it feels better in the long run.
Yeah, I think the 3 just gives you a little bit more cushion. It is probably maybe a little bit more aggressive through the midfoot, and then because you've got a bit more of a rocker bottom on that than you would well do on the 2, especially with the heel coming off as well. It might just take a bit of action from your foot. So if someone's maybe struggling a little bit through the foot and can't work as hard through their calf Achilles complex, the 3 might be a nicer shoe. If you've got a stronger calf Achilles complex and you can turn over your feet well and you have a nice high cadence, the 2 might be a better shoe fit for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of the pros are still sticking with the 2s. I think if you've got that form and you can maintain it.
Exactly. If you can keep consistency with your cadence and your stride for 42 Ks, and at the pro level, these guys are running 160 kilometers a week, so they've got the endurance and the muscle memory and the nervous system endurance to do it as well. But say for the everyday person like ourselves, where we might feel some of those elements where the fatigue after kilometer 30 and things like that, then the 3 will be a nicer shoe because it seems to be a little bit more forgiving at the back, and it gives you a little bit more so you don't feel like you have to work as hard as the race gets heavier and harder.
Yeah, it's almost like they're both like supercars. like the Adios Pro 3 is like a GT car.
Yeah.
It's nice and comfortable. You're going to go fast. You're going to be relaxed. You know what I mean? You know, you've got air conditioning. But like these are like a 911 stripped down type thing.
Yeah.
It's fast, but it's going to be uncomfortable. Do you know what I mean? Potentially, do you know what I mean? It's just a raw racer, so they're both fast, but it's just depending like what you.
When you like, I don't know. I think about like when Jeremy Clarkson would like review a car in Top Gear, he goes, yeah, this car's really fast, but it's also a slight bit uncomfortable because it's kind of built for racing. But you'd go down the model, so you go from like a GT3 911 to like a regular 911.
Yeah.
Still a stupidly fast car.
Yeah.
But it just feels a little more comfortable, so you know you can drive that around London. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay, we'll probably save our Top Gear references for another time. For the next video to this.
I think that's as far as my Top Gear references go.
But this is awesome though. Thanks, Adrian. I think
The differences between the shoes are small, and it really comes down to what's your preference. I think a key factor with these shoes is how it feels from the start of the run to the end of the run. I think there's more noticeable difference in the twos. They start off feeling fantastic and not so great towards the end for me personally. When I ran the Sevilla Marathon in the twos, they felt great at the beginning, but towards the end as my form started to go, it felt really uncomfortable to run in. However, in the threes, I've worn them in longer marathon runs, so not quite worn them in a marathon, but they feel good, they feel stable, they feel pretty much similar from when you start running them to the end, so that's a good sign as I head towards Berlin. And the twos have more flex in them, and this isn't as noticeable when you're feeling good and fresh, but it does become a bit of an issue when you're getting a bit more fatigue, whereas I find that in the threes you can tell that they've stiffened up the rods and it's a lot firmer and there's a lot less flex. It's still soft and cushioned from the extra foam, but there's a lot less flex in your forefoot, especially when you're rolling forward. But I'd like to stress that it's really close between the shoes. A lot of pros like the twos, and I can see why, but for me, that initial snap and responsiveness does come at a cost if you can't maintain the form. I think the threes have better foam, and although you lose some of that initial responsiveness on the forefoot, I find that the Rocker is actually better for giving you a more aggressive and more dynamic running motion, especially for a longer distance. So taking those considerations into mind, the Adios Pro 3s are going to be my choice for the Berlin Marathon. Thanks for watching this episode. The next episode is going to be showing how I get on Berlin and showing a little bit more behind the scenes of what happens in the build up to the race and post-race. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment because it all matters. And I'll see you in episode 5.